Good evening and welcome. I'm Harold Holzer. I have the privilege of serving as the Jonathan Fanton Director of Roosevelt House. And on behalf of Hunter President Jennifer Rabb, who will be here soon, I'm delighted to welcome you all to an event that Roosevelt House is proud to co-host with the Immigrant Justice Corps on navigating the humanitarian crisis. Another program, by the way, made possible by the Stepansky Family Foundation, and Melinda Stepansky is here to accept our thanks. I also want to welcome our Board of Advisors star, Robbie Spector, who is here, and Judge Katzman is also a member of our Board of Advisors, and you will meet him in a moment. The man and woman who lived in this house for 25 years clearly faced humanitarian crises of their own to grapple with in very difficult times. And while the debate has raged about some of Franklin Roosevelt's responses to humanitarian crises ever since, and deserve to be aired and discussed, as our Board of Advisors member Bill Vanden Heuvel loves to do, if anyone questions FDR. Eleanor's work in humanitarian relief after the war also deserves our constant acknowledgement, particularly her efforts to codify FDR's Four Freedoms aspirations into an international covenant of human rights, guaranteeing the security of every person and the safety of every haven, still a landmark of international law. And it was FDR who said memorably, remember always that all of us, and you and I especially, are all descended from immigrants and revolutionists. I love that quote. I'll leave the rest of the discussion, of course, to the experts who are here tonight. I do want to say, though, that we here at Roosevelt House and throughout Hunter College, we take our commitment to new arrivals and immigrants and hopefully new citizens not only seriously but with a passionate commitment. It's visible, that commitment is visible or audible in all the scores, literally scores of languages spoken on this campus, in the diversity of cultural experiences that our students share, in the activism and humanitarianism of the kids. But at Hunter, it's a matter of policy too. I hope that many of you read that a couple of weeks ago, Hunter led the way toward fulfilling the now tragically tenuous dreams of dreamers by holding a DACA renewal fair here at school on campus, organized by President Jennifer Rabb, before any CUNY campuses thought of doing this. Happily, they all came around. Where we not only had a lawyer on hand to advise students, but also a passport photographer, and where we not only advised students on DACA renewals and the process and the requirements, but paid for every renewal also. And if there are any students or parents of students or grandparents of students who want to hear more about it, Malky Schwartz is here, who helped engineer that project at Hunter. So see her later. By the way, some of the students who availed themselves of this service and this opportunity left messages on a board which we called I am more than papers, I am more than my papers. I am ... and they filled in their self-identification, aspiration, or belief. We moved the big board here today so you could see it. That's what you may have seen when you came in this evening without explanation, so I got to explain it to you. So have a look before we get together for our reception. It's inspiring and illuminating. So to begin the program, I want to call on our beloved member of our Board of Advisors, a mentor and friend to me ever since I arrived at Roosevelt House more than 2 years ago, a man who may have studied at Columbia, Harvard, and Yale, but more than makes up for that obviously that void in your life by being so important in Hunter's life now. Please welcome the Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, our friend Judge Bob Katzmann.
Thank you, Harold. It's really wonderful to be an advisory board member under your leadership. You are someone who is a guide to the past through your Lincoln Scholarship, and you help us settle the present and think for the future. And so grateful for your leadership. And I'm a big fan of Hunter. I'm a big fan of public education, having graduated from the public schools of New York. So it's a real honor, and thanks to Bill Goldstein for all of his efforts as we put this program together. It's a real honor to be here to say some introductory words about the Immigrant Justice Corps. When I became a judge in 1999, Second Circuit consists of Connecticut, New York, and Vermont. The immigration docket was minuscule. There were very few cases. But then after 9/11, when there was a concern about who was here legally, who shouldn't be here, the docket of the Second Circuit within a few years virtually doubled, such that 40% of the cases were immigration cases. And in case after case after case, I could get a sense of a broken immigration system. And part of that breakdown was in the absence of quality counsel for immigrants. In case after case, I had the sense, if only there had been a good lawyer at the very outset of proceedings, that things would have been different. Things could have been different. By the time a case got to us at the Court of Appeals, it was often too late. And then as I peeled back the problem with the help of some wonderful experts, what I discovered was that the problem wasn't just in the poor quality of lawyering that I was seeing. It was really in the lack of counsel altogether at the very outset of proceedings, because it is at the very outset of proceedings that the case is made or not made for immigrants. And so I really had trouble sleeping, thinking about what I saw was this breakdown in our justice system. And so to make a long story short, that led me to propose the creation of what is known as the Immigrant Justice Corps, which came to life because of, in the first instance, the Robin Hood Foundation. I'm very grateful. I think, is that Deborah Winchell in back? And also, to some extent, I have to thank very much Kirk Semple of the New York Times, who actually covered this idea of a corps early on before it even existed. And the Robin Hood Foundation people saw a story that Kirk Semple had published online, not in the print version of the New York Times, and it captured their attention, and the rest is history. So the Immigrant Justice Corps is the nation's largest expansion of legal counsel for immigrants. It consists of, we've recruited some 140 justice fellows, as we call them. Most of them are young law school graduates. There are also community fellows, that is recent college graduates who want to help in the immigration field. Some of them have been Hunter College graduates. These fellows are simply nothing short of amazing. Many of them have immigrant backgrounds themselves. Those that don't have just devoted themselves to the cause of immigrant justice. And in less than 2.5 years, the Immigrant Justice Corps has served something like 29,000 families and their immigrants. And they've made the difference between being able to stay in this country and not stay in this country. What is also extraordinary is the success rate, which is something like 95%. So with appreciation to all those who support the Immigrant Justice Corps, including my friend Robbie Spector, we have been able to move forward. Some 39 nonprofit agencies, institutions in the New York area have benefited from having an Immigrant Justice Corps lawyer. The Immigrant Justice Corps began in New York City. It has moved to upstate, Long Island, New Jersey. It's moving to Connecticut. It has a rapid response team that has gone down to Texas to help something like 1,100 women and their children. There are plans now for national expansion under our extraordinary leader, Jojo Annabil, about whom you'll be hearing more. So what you will be seeing today is something that inspires me each and every day, and that is the extraordinary fellows that we have who are so committed to serving the cause of immigrant justice. And we couldn't have a better guide to this discussion than Liz Robbins, who has been really our eyes and ears as we try to understand what's going on with respect to immigration. And her reporting, the New York area beat, has been nothing short of indispensable for all of us. And I might note as well that she has a rich background in reporting, having worked as an intern at the Boston Globe and the Washington Post before joining the St. Petersburg Times, moving on to the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and then to the New York Times. And apart from the immigration beat, for many years she was a sports reporter. And I just ordered today, and I hope to get her to autograph it when it comes in, A Race Like No Other, which is about the 26.2 mile marathon in New York. So, you know, there's a parallel between marathon running and public policy, and that is that nothing worth doing can be done quickly, and it takes discipline. It takes really sort of keeping up with the ups and downs and the obstacles and never giving up in the hope that you get to the end. So with that, it's my privilege to turn it over to Liz.
Do I have to turn this on? It should be on. Judge Katzman, thank you so much, and thanks for plugging the book. But as a sports writer, I did the same thing I'm doing now, and that's telling people stories, because that's what people need to hear. And this is not just about policy, but it's how policy affects people and affects immigrants. So I'm really honored to be here today, sitting next to Jojo Annabil, who will, you are going to speak first and then hand it to me, or? Okay, then at the end you will hear from Jojo. And I would like you all to keep in mind questions, because we will do that at the end. I know you may have something that comes up, so write it down and save it for the end. But we are here today because every day it seems that there is a new indignity for immigrants. We've seen this Well, even before President Trump, but especially pronounced in this administration, from the travel ban and all of its iterations to the interior enforcement that removed all priorities and made all people here who are unauthorized basically vulnerable to deportation. And we saw how this changed the dynamic with ICE check-ins with the enforcement agency, where people would come in and they may not come out. So I have written about that, and right now, perhaps the most immediate issue facing the immigrant community and immigrant advocacy community is what's going to go on with DACA. At the end, Jojo will give his predictions, and we are lucky here to have a former DACA recipient, but also lawyers who work with people who are applying for DACA. And a shout out again to Hunter College and actually the whole CUNY system too for really giving DACA recipients not only money to help in the renewals, but also guidance. I think what's important to know about DACA and the 800,000 people who are affected by whatever this decision may be is that they are the so-called good immigrants. And this is the narrative that we've heard throughout the Trump administration. They're the good immigrants. And the bad immigrants, well, those are the people that have to be deported. And we're seeing that in the migrants who have been fleeing the Northern Triangle and the violence in these countries, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and they come here and they come to the border, and we are certainly dealing with the influx that happened from 2014 and 2015 and still now today. So these are the so-called bad immigrants, and the issues are always changing within the immigrant communities in New York, but that just makes communities more fearful, but also more resolute. And that's why it's so necessary to have advocates and to have lawyers and journalists as well. My role is to document and to profile and to explain the nuance of immigration, because it's not black and white, it's not good versus evil. As we all know, there are so many nuances to be considered in the law and also in everybody's individual case. So, without further ado, I will introduce our wonderful panelists here, because your role is to explain, to contest, and to use the law to help rather than hurt. So directly to my left is Victor Cueva, and he is a third-year fellow at the Workers' Justice Center in Kingston, New York. Now, this is super important that he is actually coming down from the Hudson Valley, because when I wrote a story actually it was the second year of the program, the thrust was we need to get lawyers in places that, need them, that are underserved, and the Hudson Valley was one of those areas. So I look forward to hearing about that. But Victor came when he was 11 years old from Peru, came legally, but had a very bad experience with an immigration lawyer. And his family was defrauded, and they were left undocumented. Now, I'm thrilled to understand from today that he is a U.S. citizen and had a very emotional ceremony with one Judge Katzman. And so congratulations. And also to his left is Daniele Rodriguez del Orbe, and she came here when she was 8 years old from the Dominican Republic. And she is a third-year community fellow at the New York Public Library in the Bronx. She hasn't quite started yet, but she is headed there. So nothing more important. My mom was a librarian, so I know everything happens at a library, and this is the community center. So she is a fully accredited representative of the Board of Immigration Appeals, so she can do a lot of the work that lawyers do, and so important to have a BIA representative. Most importantly, she, in college, founded the John Jay Dreamers. So we will talk about that in a little bit. So Lindsay Mullet is a 2016 Justice Fellow working with Lutheran Social Services here in Manhattan. During law school at Harvard, she worked at the Harvard Immigration and Refugee Clinic, the Harvard Immigration Project's Removal Defense Project, and she's interned at the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, which this winter really gained a lot of notoriety as one of the first groups to sue the government over the de facto Muslim ban, and actually is still engaged in lawsuits with the government. So in addition to working with individuals, advocacy and legal programs really have a role in challenging this government, as we have seen. And finally, we have Dave Wilkins, who's a staff attorney at the Central American Legal Assistance in Brooklyn, CALA. I've worked a lot with CALA, and they have tremendously overworked lawyers who are always helping people in this community and working with asylum applications, I know, and temporary protected status. But what's also interesting is that you work for the other side. So you interned with the government and the agency that oversees the immigration courts, the Executive Office for Immigration Review. So we have an esteemed group here of panelists. But I'll start out with an easy question. We'll go this way first. So Dave, this is for all of you, but why did you apply to this fellowship, and what has surprised you most that you didn't expect about immigration law?
Sure. So I guess I applied to be an immigration lawyer principally because I'd been interested in international human rights when I started law school, and then I really wanted to work in the asylum context because in asylum what we're doing is using international human rights instruments, the Refugee Convention, the Convention Against Torture, in domestic contexts. And so that was really what got me into kind of that field generally. And then I really wanted to work for IJC. I mean, I'm originally from the New York area. It was a fabulous opportunity to work with a cohort of other young lawyers. I was the first year that it was announced. It was announced right when I was about to graduate, so it was very fortuitous. And I was very, very fortunate to be chosen. In terms of what surprised me, all my clients, or 95% of my clients, are from the Northern Triangle of Central America, which is Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. And winning asylum from those countries is very difficult because they don't fit kind of a classical paradigm of what a political asylee is. You know, they're not often fearing government persecution, they're fearing persecution by non-state actors. And convincing
Meaning gangs mostly.
And transnational criminal organizations, narco-traffickers, and corrupt government officials. And convincing adjudicators that their opposition to these groups is political is extremely challenging. And I had known that going in, but just seeing kind of the depth, the degree of difficulty has been really shocking to me because people are fleeing unimaginable violence. You know, the highest murder rates in the world, often more violent than war-torn areas. And, you know, we do our best, but it is often that we have to take cases up on appeal because we lose at the trial level. It's extraordinarily difficult, often, to win asylum from Central America.
So as a journalist, I just have to follow up on this. Have you seen a marked difference in how difficult asylum cases have become under the Trump administration? They always were very, very tough.
That's a good question. I would say they've remained very difficult.
Yeah.
The thing that's become more difficult, and I can talk about this a little bit more later, is often if a case was a little bit borderline, you know, if it was a very difficult case to win legally for various reasons, under the Obama administration, the government, the agency prosecuting the case, the Department of Homeland Security, would offer to administratively close that case.
Right.
As kind of a, you know, understanding that the client had fled very serious issues, but maybe the case sort of didn't fit neatly under the law. But under the Trump administration, prosecutorial discretion has been completely dismantled. And so now you have a lot of cases that are extremely challenging that we have to litigate all the way through. And, you know, a lot of judges previously were very happy to be able to, you know, administratively close a case that they would find difficult to be able to grant under the current system. And now all those cases we have to fight out, you know, all the way up to the Second Circuit often.
Bad thing, always. But no, it's true. And that is leading to a lot of the backlog that we already had in the asylum courts, too. So Lindsay, I know you've been on the East Coast at Harvard. You're originally from Seattle area. Tell me what you have noticed and why you wanted to become a fellow, and what you have noticed specifically about New York, the New York immigration scene.
Yeah, so I decided immigration law in law school. So I went because I decided that law could maybe be related to justice, which I had never considered beforehand. And then I was like, oh, actually, these things I care about, maybe the law is an important tool to get that done and to fight for people. I had worked in social services in Los Angeles with survivors of trafficking and of other trauma. And so kind of went into law school with that in mind and found this group of people that have experienced such horrific trauma and where the law really can open doors. And so that's why I ended up in immigration law. And specifically this fellowship, I mean, I wasn't one of the few that was like, yes, New York or bust, you know? So I think to me it was a really unique opportunity to be part, as Dave mentioned, as a part of this cohort and to see also in an environment where it sort of works, to be in an environment where there are actually a number of agencies here, where there are judges who will grant at least sometimes, and kind of get that experience for the first couple of years as a good training ground, to then, you know, we'll see where we go after that. And I think it's been interesting. A couple of things have stood out in terms of the scene. One, in terms of what's happening in New York. I was just speaking earlier to another journalist actually about kind of what's happening right now. And it's shocking to me how many people that in a city like New York City, where there are as many organizations as there is an incredibly long list that I could share, and yet there are so many people who cannot find representation. Wow. And that's shocking because when you think about every other part of the country, there's like one organization on that list. You know, you're like, oh, well, if you go 5 hours from here, you might be able to go see this organization. And here, even with as many organizations as we have and as many wonderful people working on this as we do, so many people go unrepresented still or are actively looking for representation. We're like shuttling them around from one place to another. And there are so many people who defraud them, and that's a really common experience as well. And then I think the other thing on a more positive note that is surprising, I guess, but definitely has struck me is just working with these people who are facing such terrible odds sometimes, and to have experienced so much in their lives, just incredible amounts, and yet how resilient they are. And so I have clients. I have an 18-year-old mother of 2 young children, both rape babies, you know, who's experienced just incredible amounts through her life, and the fact that she can be here in a city she doesn't know, speaking without a language that she knows, and survive without a support network is mind-boggling to me. So those are the things that
it's probably better than the alternative, going back.
And that's also shocking sometimes. Yeah.
Exactly. So Victor, let me ask you, because we bring up the issue of notario fraud, and when I wrote the story about you, I was just so heartbroken to remember that, you know, your father had overstayed a visa, and it was a tourist visa, I think, right, from Peru. And he didn't realize what he needed to do. And then tell us what happened. And was that what made you want to do immigration law?
Pretty much, yes. You know my story very well. So, yes, I came from Peru. I was 11 years old. We came with a tourist visa. I didn't know any of what this meant. And we had overstayed the visa. So through work, my father tried to seek counsel in the Hudson Valley. We settled in Kingston, New York, which, for those of you who don't know, that's 2 hours north of here. It was the first capital of New York State. You should visit sometime. The
Leafs will be great soon. The leaves are starting to bloom.
Yes, it's very beautiful over there in the fall. But we went to this attorney who promised us a work visa through my dad, and he was working at a bakery now. If I could have been part of that, I was part of that interview process, and I translating. I was translating for my dad, and I wish that I knew then what I know now, because I would have immediately identified that as not possible form of relief for us. And so we were, she took money from us.
$1,000, right?
$1,000, yes. You remember well. Yeah.
I
It was a lot of money for us. My mom just cleaned houses. My dad worked at the bakery, so they saved up to try to do something about it, and that was our experience. So that led me into law school. And when I was a second-year student, IJC had just begun, and for my third year, they were expanding to the Hudson Valley. And the goal of mine has been, and it still remains, to bring the what I would say abundance of resources here in New York City up to the Hudson Valley, where it's really needed. And when I talk about maybe the mid Hudson Valley, because I don't really count Westchester that much. I know you guys think of it as upstate already, but I'm talking about the counties above Westchester, where like Lindsay was saying, there can just be one organization. And right now, I am at the Worker Justice Center, and I am the one immigration attorney in that organization. So these areas really do need a lot of help, and that's why. With the expansion of IJC's services to the Hudson Valley and New Jersey and Long Island, I sought the opportunity to be able to be trained by great leaders and also be a part of something big. I saw it as being part of something that could actually have an effect in the lives of my community in the Hudson Valley. So I applied, and I was very, very fortunate to be chosen.
That's great. Thank you, Victor. And Daniele, you are not a lawyer, at least not yet, but tell me a little bit about your experience at CUNY and starting the CUNY Dreamers and how that got you into what you're doing now, if it did indeed have an effect.
Hello, everyone. So I came to the United States when I was 8 years old, and I was not inspected when I came in. And for most of my young adult life, I did not know what being undocumented was. I knew that I was, I just did not know what it meant in the system, right? So it came to senior year of high school, and when I was applying to college, and I was graduating top of my class, and I couldn't apply to financial aid. And it just brought onto me all this frustration, right? Like, I did everything right. I went to school, I got good grades, I never got in trouble. I was basically the good immigrant that they talk about in the news. And I found myself crying and frustrated that I couldn't aspire to go to the universities that I wanted to. So that led me to CUNY, and honestly, I am so thankful and so grateful that I got to go, right? And because I don't think I would be where I am today had I not gone to CUNY. Because the support system that I've received in CUNY, I don't imagine receiving anywhere else. So my freshman year, I kind of stayed under the radar, just went to classes, went home. I couldn't afford to stay in campus because we were struggling to pay tuition, struggling to pay for MetroCard. I remember I would only go to school 3 times a week, so MetroCard would be shorter. And my sophomore year, a professor, I was always very feisty. My tongue was always quick. So on my freshman year of college, I was taking an ethnicity and English class, and they took us to a Tenement Museum. And there, one of my classmates said that immigrants didn't pay taxes. And I knew enough by then. My parents were immigrants, and they paid taxes, so I snapped at him, and I was like, actually, you're pretty ignorant. And my professor laughed, and I guess she took note of that. And a few months later, she sent me an application to apply for a peer counseling program for me to be able to get an advisor or eventually become an advisor. And at that time, that was in 2011 or early 2012. DACA had not been announced yet. And the first thing that I saw in the application was the Social Security. And by this time, I knew that the first thing I would check for any application for any job was for social, right, for a social requirement, so that I could know whether I could apply. And I didn't, and she realized. And for a long time, she emailed me a few months, and I never got back to her because I felt ashamed for a long time. Until I ran into my professor in the hallway, and she confronted me and said, why didn't you apply? I wanted you to do it. And I told her, like, I'm undocumented, I can't. So she's like, come to my office, we're gonna talk about this.
And who is this professor? Was it Isabel Martinez?
Professor Martinez at John Jay College. Yeah. And she became my mentor. She started sending me scholarships that didn't require Social Security. And eventually she sent me a fellowship, what's called a Dream Fellowship with the New York Immigration Coalition, where they train you to become an advocate and a leader. And I applied and I got in. And I can't lie, they offered me $2,000 for tuition. I was like, oof, this is it. I didn't see myself. I wanted to do corporate law when I went into John Jay. I wanted to be either FBI, DEA, or go be a corporate lawyer.
So what's the difference?
And then I ended up in the Dream Fellowship, and they taught us how to talk to the media, how to share our stories, how to become leaders in the community. They placed us at nonprofit organizations around New York, and my heart just opened up. From there, I realized I got connected to so many of the dream teams from CUNY, and I realized that John Jay is a social justice school, and we didn't have one. So I paired up with one of my co-fellows, and we founded the John Jay Dreamers, fall 2013. And from then on, it was a roller coaster that only went up. From then, I was speaking in the media. I was on Univision, and my mom was watching at home. She was scared. She didn't want me to be out there, but I had no other option. And this is how CUNY shaped me, right? Because from then on, I ended up applying. DACA was announced June 2012, and I applied. I received my work permit, and from there, I ended up applying for CUNY Service Corps, and I was placed at CUNY Citizenship Now. And the first day there, my supervising attorney screened me, and I had no idea. She was just asking me personal questions, and I'm like, oh, this is pretty weird. And she screened me, and she told me I was eligible for SIJ. And
Which is Special Immigrant Juvenile Status.
Yes. So it's funny how life worked, because she ended up working at IJC. So it was a roller coaster that only went up, and I ended up becoming an activist. And by the time that I was in my senior year of college, Judge Katzman had came to John Jay and done a presentation on Immigrant Justice Corps, and that was in 2014. I graduated 2015, but I knew that I was going to apply. I went to the recruitment event, and I applied the following year, and now here I am 3 years later. Well, 2 years later.
That is amazing, because we have these incredible personal stories of why you want to help others. In this job, you can't help everyone, and that may be one of the realizations that you have come to. And so we talk about how amazing it is when you see that you can help somebody. But for each of you, and maybe in a short way, you can tell us, was there an experience where even with these very high stakes, you weren't able to help someone? And how did you, and what did you learn from that? Dave, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, it happens, I must say, daily. I mean, my organization has a walking legal clinic, 9 to 3, for anybody who's in removal proceedings from Central America. And so we, are constantly giving people legal advice about their options. And, often, as I mentioned, the system is very specific. You have to demonstrate that, not just that you fear harm upon return to your home country, but that you'd be persecuted. And persecuted on account of one of 5 reasons under the law: your race, your religion, your nationality, your political opinion, or your membership in a vulnerable group.
So you can't just say, the gang is going to kill me if I go back. You have to give a reason, a specific reason why and who the people are.
Exactly. And, people, pretty much everybody I talk to has a family member who's been harmed or killed by these very powerful gangs. The violence is so extreme, but often, just based on the facts of an individual's case, they're not going to be eligible for political asylum. And, in one particular case, I did take this individual's case. He was being recruited by 2 different armed gangs in Honduras that are very violent, ties
MS-13 was one of them, or Cali 18?
Yes, yeah, the 18th Street Gang and MS-13, actually both gangs. And, there was 4 or 5 incidents where, they approached him, they beat him up, kind of escalating levels of threats, saying, if you don't join, we will kill you. And in fact, based on the country conditions evidence, I do believe that the gangs would have killed him for his refusal to cooperate. And so we argue, that his opposition to the gang should be understood as a political opinion, because the gangs have de facto governing control in the area, even though they're not, the traditional government. Unfortunately, we presented the case. This particular adjudicator denied the case. We appealed it to the Board of Immigration Appeals. The Board of Immigration Appeals upheld the denial, and we weren't able to, we decided for strategic reasons not to bring it to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. And it's just, from the beginning, you know, I had to tell this client, you know, this is a really hard case. Yeah. There's, at the intake stage, you know, the first time I meet with somebody, I have to explain, you know, this is the situation on the ground. This is what, you know, I'm not saying that the system as currently constituted is just, but this is what it means, and this is how it's going to interact with you. And I mean,
what happened to the person? Where is he now?
He's here, and he's undocumented with the final order of removal. You know,
right, and so they know
he
where
came when
he
he was
is.
16. He's now 19. I mean, it's the gravity of this is really hard to understand when you're a teenager. You know, making your transition to living in a new country, living with his uncles in the Bronx, going to school in the U.S. for the first time, learning new language. I mean, it was, you know, it's too much for him to comprehend at age 16. Now at age 19, you know, it's hard for him to look at, you know, a life here undocumented with an old order of removal that Immigration and Customs Enforcement could, you know, carry out at any moment.
Right. It's shocking, but then again, it's not. You prepared yourself, and he probably doesn't quite understand it yet. And Lindsay, I know you said you were working with people who have been involved with domestic violence and other issues. I don't know if there is one case that sadly you weren't able to prevail in. And what did you learn?
Yeah, I think one of the cases that come to mind actually happened before I came here. There have been a few here. I think that the life of cases are so long that there's many that we haven't gotten to the end of at all here. But it was a really sad case where this woman had experienced really horrific trauma, and in many ways was very straightforwardly qualified for asylum under the law, which is not always the case. But she was indigenous and had been cut off from, and also was severely traumatized from Guatemala. Yeah, and didn't speak a language that other people understood, wasn't educated, lived out kind of away from other people, and just really didn't have access to resources. And so by the time she finally came forward and was connected to legal services and spoke enough Spanish that we could work with her, it had been a long time. And so there's a one-year requirement for asylum where you are supposed to apply within the first year of arrival, which is crazy when you think of what the people have gone through that are coming.
Many cannot even talk about what happened to them.
Right, and this is one of those cases, you know, I think it was an extremely shameful thing. She had been gang raped, and it was something she hadn't talked to anybody about for years and years, and was, you know, dealing very seriously with that trauma. And so to me, that was so straightforward. Like, here's this case, like, where there are ways to get around the 1 year, you know, and you're like, this in extraordinary circumstances, and this seems, if anything, very clearly an extraordinary circumstance. Here's this woman who hasn't been able to talk about this to anybody for years and years, who's living in a community that's cut off from other resources, both by language and culture, who's not educated, and they referred. I was at the asylum office, but they referred to the immigration court on this case on the 1 year issue only. And she was devastated. I had to leave before they could go through the rest of it in court. But
when you say referred, you mean that they went
so
back
they
to the judge, they
denied,
but a judge can still have the final say on this.
Right, so it gets denied at the asylum office, it gets sent to the judge.
Which basically means that it will be denied.
It depends on the case, but yes, it could mean that. And for her, it was really devastating because even if we could win, and again, that case was pending last I knew about it, so I don't know if they've decided yet, but for her, it was like this enormous trust betrayal, because it had taken so long for her to be able to talk about any of the things that had happened. And so even from the standpoint of even if on the merits we can now win, I mean, the impact on this woman was really devastating. So I think that was the hardest loss that I've experienced.
Victor, is there a specific high stake case that you have had and were not able to prevail?
Yeah, unfortunately, we have a lot of these, not a lot, but enough losses to remember. One in particular was from a client in Middletown, New York, in Orange County. But because through Catholic Charities, when I was working there at the time, I would service this woman out of the Newburgh office. She was applying for something called affirmative deferred action or humanitarian deferred action. Pretty much like DACA, it's not enforcing the immigration laws based on some sort of medical condition or humanitarian ground. It's what I was trying to seek. And this is part of what they've talked to about discretion not being enforced under this administration, because I had guarantees from supervisors that my fact pattern was very compelling, and in the past they have gotten these cases approved. So I was seeking that form of relief. This woman was not in removal proceedings at all. There was a lot of she was on dialysis for 12 years, so she needed a liver transplant to survive, and because she had been doing dialysis 3 times a week for a period of 12 years, she developed this huge bumps in her arm from the needles. So I submitted photos, I submitted medical records. One of her U.S. citizen daughters was raped. So the girl, 18-year-old, she was raped when she was 10 years old. There was a lot of trauma, police reports, all these factors that anyone with a heart would consider for her action. And we put together the packet, and I submitted it. And before I left Catholic Charities, before my second year in the fellowship, I received a denial. And I just could not believe that something like this would get denied. And it's not like we were asking for a green card, a lawful permanent residency. We were asking for deferred action.
Which is no status at all,
Exactly.
really.
Now, I guess, fortunately, that she had another form of relief available, which was a U visa for victims of crimes. However, that is a form of relief that takes way too long for any benefits to be received, and the immediate benefit that she was seeking was a liver for her to live. So that was one that I think to this day.
Wow. Okay, so we've been depressed enough. I'm going to ask Daniele a positive story. How have you, in what you've done with IJC, helped somebody? And then we have probably time for 2 more of my questions. So think about it.
So this is a case that I am holding very close to my heart, and it's currently pending. When Trump got elected in November, I started going to my alma mater after work, and I started screening. John Jay, yes. I started screening whoever would come, students, parents, sometimes parents and students, whole families, trying to find any relief, right? Because we knew we could imagine what was coming. A lot of them were documented, and they were not eligible for status until I found this family whose mom had previously filed an application, and that it was marriage based, and it never turned out to anything. She ended up divorcing, not even separating from her husband. She had serious medical issues, and she had 2 U.S. citizen daughters. And right away, I knew that I had to file what's called the FOIA, right? I had to ask for her documents because I could imagine that maybe she was 245I eligible. Her daughter is 21.
245? Do you want to
245I basically means that even though she entered without inspection, she could receive a waiver allowing her to adjust status through her daughter. And she had no idea. She had been screened by lawyers before, and she had no idea that she was eligible. While I was waiting for her FOIA, around 4 months in, she calls me and she says, I'm in the hospital. And she's waiting for a transplant. And her social worker called me and told me that she might be eligible for something. How can you help her? Because if she doesn't receive medical insurance, we won't be able to do a transplant. And this woman has been here over 20 years, right? And I waited for that FOIA. I waited on it and waited until it finally arrived, and I saw that she was eligible. And I called her up, and I'm gonna cry, but I called her up, and she was in bed in the hospital, and I told her, you're eligible, like, we can start. I can go to the hospital and start, like, I will bring my laptop and start the applications while you're in bed. I don't care. And she started crying, and she's calling her daughter, and we filed the application, and it's currently pending. and I am so excited. And I feel like partly the reason why I even extended my fellowship was to see that case through.
Wow. That's amazing. That's terrific. So we have lots of stories. This job is about stories, what you're doing, and listening to people and taking the time for 2-3 years sometimes to see it all through. I can't help but hear the emotion, and I know that you all probably get attached to clients, even though it's very hard to. And I too am feeling the emotion, and we all probably have felt very heavy in this last year trying to process everything. I recently wrote a story that actually involved a lot of John Jay students about their DACA recipients and how they're trying to deal with the mental health effects of this. And I assume as practitioners, you're also dealing with secondary trauma as well. But I want to talk about DACA. Maybe it's a way, I don't know how much time exactly, but we're going to talk with the panelists, and then I'm going to have JoJo address it as well. But can you talk about some of your clients who may have had DACA? People understand what it stands for, I'm sure now, right? Deferred action for childhood arrival. So people who came here and came here as children and really had no say in this, as we heard from Daniele. And what we're hearing from the Trump administration, and I have been hearing this as I cover gang-related violence, is that the Trump administration wants to say that unaccompanied minors are streaming to the border because they know they can get DACA, which, I mean, even Jeff Sessions is saying this, which makes absolutely no sense for those of us who know the law, because you had to have been here since 2007. You had to come when you were under the age of 16, and you had to be under the age of 30 in 2012. So there's so much misinformation, and a lot of people are saying, well, this is why potential gang members are coming in, because they're thinking about getting DACA. But there is a secondary response that is very dangerous, and that people who are coming as unaccompanied minors, their sponsors, their guardians, their parents, many of whom they may not have even seen for 20 years, are now, even though they were promised that they would be safe, now the government is going after people who are sponsors, who are guardians, and saying, you have trafficked, you have been involved in human trafficking. So this is a way of perhaps not stopping people at the border when they're coming, but it is a deterring factor. And I'm wondering, have you encountered these parents? What is the fear factor relating to DACA? If you can talk about this in maybe different respects. And Dave, if you want to start from Kala's perspective.
Sure. I mean, we work with a huge number of unaccompanied minors, which are young people who came to the U.S. without one of their two parents present before the age of 18. And one of the things that's been so infuriating about the Trump administration's response is that in order to seek political asylum, you have to be physically present on U.S. soil. Right. And if you don't have a tourist visa that you overstay or something, there is physically no way to get here other than crossing without status and seeking political asylum, once you cross into Texas from Mexico or something. And, you have these parents in this impossible situation where, you have a parent here in the US who hears that their kid in home country is being threatened by gangs, maybe has been harmed by gangs, maybe has been subjected to sexual violence, and they want their child to come up as quickly as possible. The Obama administration had started to implement an overseas refugee processing program called the Central American Minors Program to help some of the kids, while they were still in their home countries, start the refugee processing.
And it was very small.
It was a very small number.
But at least it was something.
Yeah, it was a start.
Which has since been canceled.
Which has since been canceled. The same month that Trump's administration started prosecuting parents or identifying these parents as smugglers. So they have no legal way to bring their children up to the United States. The children have no legal way to enter to seek asylum. But when they're put in a difficult position to have to come up here without status, the parents are then treated as smugglers. So it creates this impossible situation where if you're a parent here and your kid is in danger in your home country, there is no physical way for you to get them here without putting yourself at risk. And so parents or sponsors here in the United States are terrified, but often they say, it was the only thing I could do. It's for my children. What would you do? And so, I just find it particularly galling that, the Obama administration's attempt to try to create some sort of overseas refugee processing mechanism was shuttered, with no fanfare whatsoever at the exact same time that kind of these parents are being treated as smugglers.
And leaving many parents, thinking that their children were coming and now are not.
Yeah, precisely.
Lindsay, do you have experience with these clients?
Recently, so our office, we also have like a side gig where we fingerprint sponsors. So I don't personally do it, but another one of my colleagues does. And so recently,
fingerprint sponsors for the
for
application.
UACs.
Mhm.
So UACs, once they cross once they're screened and they realize that they're unaccompanied and they're minors, they put them in ORR shelters. The Office of Refugee Resettlement, they put them in shelters. And then once they can identify somebody to release them to, if there is somebody, then they typically fingerprint those sponsors and the kids get released to that person. So oftentimes that is a parent, sometimes it's an aunt, sometimes it's a friend. It can be kind of anybody, but any adult who does that. So we see a lot of these sponsors come up, and some of them are just, they're terrified because they don't know where they're going. They're just like coming to this office to get fingerprinted, and it's immigration, and like who knows what's going to happen. And a couple, so like recently, so we've seen a few. We had a case that was of a mother of two, mother and aunt of two kids, teenage boys, and I think that they're from Honduras, but they got there and she, so my colleague who had fingerprinted her, like got them in for the sponsorship, got them in for a consult with me. And so I was meeting with these kids to kind of see if they had an asylum claim, what else was happening. And while I was talking to them, the sponsor got called by HSI, which is the Homeland Security's investigations team. And it turned out, so we found out in this process that they had started kind of harassing her, calling her, and saying, you need to come in for this interview, you need to get fingerprinted, and she's like, okay. And here, this is also this woman who's like always done everything the right way as much as possible, right? And she's been here for a really long time. She has 2 USC children, young children, and her nephew and son came from a really impossible situation, and daughter was kidnapped and boyfriend shot in front of her, and like this whole thing. So she's very traumatized, very worried about her kids. And now there's this woman who's telling her, you have to come in, you have to come in, you have to come in. And we're like, maybe don't go in. Let's talk about what's going on and why they want you to come in.
Yes. So it's interesting. They used a woman to talk to a woman.
Yes, and she continues to like pressure this woman. I mean, it was a really awful thing to watch.
And what do you tell her? I mean, if Homeland Security calls, do you tell your client you're not obligated, or?
Yeah. I mean, so we had a long discussion about it. We talked to a bunch of other practitioners. We also talked to federal public defenders, and we actually ended up having her meet with a federal public defender here. Mm-hmm. And we ended up, eventually the pressure just got to be too much, and she was like, I can't have them appearing at my house. I don't know when they're gonna come. She also did, she recorded some of these phone calls, and it's just, she promises this woman that, no, you're the one making this be a problem. Like, I know you don't have papers, you're gonna get papers this way. Like, you need to come in, all sorts of things, which are absolutely untrue. Yeah, absolutely untrue. And also this enormous amount of pressure, calling her at various times of day and night, calling her, and pressuring her that she needed to come in.
Can you do anything about that? If not, maybe I can't. So
please. Yeah, no, I think it was really horrendous to watch, because as we were talking about her options, we're like, okay, yes, if you're undocumented, like they can come to your house and they can arrest you there. And here, are they actually going to do it? I don't know. I can't say. That's more work for them. You don't have to go, but we were discussing kind of what are your options, what options do you have once you go in. And so that's essentially what we ended up doing, is going in with her, with the federal public defender, saying that she wasn't going to speak. She wasn't going to answer any of their questions, but we were there to present ourselves. And so it was, but just a horrific experience for this woman. And she was calling me and texting me at all days, like all hours of the night. Terrified, truly terrified. And so to see somebody who, again, already has the terror of like being worried about her kids and what's happening, to then be put under this kind of scrutiny and not allowed to live her life was just, it was really distressing.
This is why we need more lawyers. I'm going to hold off on you guys answering. I think we could talk all night, and these really engaging panelists could speak too. So if you do have questions, we're going to have a good 15-minute period. But because DACA is such a pervasive issue right now, this is the one issue that we thought President Trump would cancel because he could. It was an executive order from President Obama. We thought he would do this immediately, and he didn't, and he delayed, and then finally made this announcement that it's canceled, but not for another 6 months. But Congress, I'm going to give you a chance to fix this. And so we're thinking, okay, this is it. But then he tweets later, and if they don't, I will revisit. So really, there is a lot of complicated back and forth issues and messages, and we have in Congress now, we have them the Democrats are trying to, and also the coalition trying to form a DREAM Act. And I want to involve Jojo in this and his expertise. And I want to know, can you explain to all of us, please, what you see happening with DACA? Take out your crystal ball. Will it be a standalone DREAM Act, therefore not tied to interior enforcement? And overall, if you can kind of pull back, do you think that the Dreamers should take a more realistic stance instead of the idealistic stance that got them DACA in the first place, and realize that times have changed?
Immigration is a very, very complex issue today. And, if I had a crystal ball and I had gotten an invite to the White House to talk about DACA, probably I would be talking about just looking at the most successful initiative in immigration. A group of people, young people, who have been given an opportunity to stay here, an opportunity to work. And all the data shows how much they've been able to do, how much working here has contributed to Social Security, how much it's contributed to Medicare. Young people who were trained with tax dollars, living in the United States. There's a war on getting people to the United States. We have an aging population between the ages of 24 and 48. And yet we cannot come together and find a path for these young people. So there are currently about 5 bills pending in Congress. The DREAM Act has been introduced in Congress about 4 times already, and they've always come so close.
Since 2001,
Since
we're talking.
2001.
16 years old.
And since then, we've had 4 other bills. So 2 are bipartisan, 2 are from conservatives, and 1 from the Democrats. The one from the Democrats is the most generous because it will take a very short period of time for DACA recipients to get lawful status. But the question always is this: can the 2 sides come together and craft a bill that we can all live with? Because what Congress always does is, when they give with the right hand, they take away with the left. They give you a benefit, and then they add other things. If you've ever been arrested, go pay taxes. You have to serve in the military for 3 years. You have to have a college degree. Not everybody can go to college. Some people are good with their hands. They can be plumbers. But I think what we are seeing today in America is we've lost the touch of welcoming immigrants. We no longer are a welcoming country. What happened to I will take the poor, the tired, those who we can help breathe free? That is what we stand for. I sit here as head of an organization of young people, young law graduates, young college graduates, so talented, but who are willing to give 2 years of their career to do this work. And I'm so proud every day of the work they do. I think DACA would get passed. We have 153 days to go to March 5th. The clock is ticking. We are watching. we are doing whatever we can to prod Congress to do something about this issue. And it's up to all of us. It's all up to all of us to push the needle a little bit, to urge our congressmen, to urge our senators to think about this issue, not make it one of whether you attach it to a debt ceiling or you attach it to a wall. These are lives. It's not a wall. These are lives. These are not drones. These are lives. These are people who suddenly have commitments. They have apartments. They have mortgages. They have a life to lead. They don't know wherever they are Americans in their heart. They would love to fight for this country. And that's what we have to push for.
Thank you, Jojo. In 6 months, where will we be? What do you think?
I think that Congress will offer something. Something will be put on the table. The question would be, is it what we can live with? Or do
And who is we?
I think we is both the DACA recipients and advocates, right? Because I don't think we can back down from just taking anything they offer us, right? When you talk about someone who's lived here since before the president, who's lived here for years, has gone through background checks,
Right.
Why does the president have to wait 13 years before the president can become legalized, right? If someone commits an offense, like crossing the border, is there a penalty? If there's a penalty, why can't the president pay that penalty? Why is it that for the first time we are holding this against this population, right? That we will not give you lawful status. We will let you toss in the wind. We will, even though we know you deserve this, even though we know you can help us, we still will make it very difficult for you. And I think we have to change that storyline.
I think what we're all seeing in what we do is that there is such a need for immigration reform. And whether it comes in a piecemeal form like this, whether it be a standalone DACA, it's not going to be enough. And it may not be enough. It may not happen. I think we can probably say that it will not happen in the Trump administration, but who knows? We don't know. My prediction, and you can all call me in 6 months and a few days, is that nothing will happen and that there will be another delay because we've seen that. So I don't know if that's optimistic or pessimistic, or just realistic. So you can hold me to that. But let's transition a little bit if you want to introduce our next guest, because we've told you a lot of heartbreaking stories tonight, and we have another positive story to balance everything out.
So we work with so many clients. We've worked with about 32,000 clients, immigrants and their families. And we've also gotten into this habit of building communities, helping build capacity at communities. So one of the communities we work with is the Arab American community in South Brooklyn. Before we got to that organization, they really had one lawyer who showed up almost once every 2 weeks for like an hour. And so in 2015, we put a justice fellow, a law graduate, and a community fellow who is a college graduate at that organization. And within months, they had been able to leverage that resource to be able to get other resources from the city, and so they had other legal advocates come to that site. One of the justice fellow we put there, Christina Eldadad, basically speaks Arabic because that's what we do. Any community-based organization we partner with, we make sure that our fellows speak the native language, and so she speaks Arabic. And so she helped that community a lot. It's made of Yemen nationals and people who speak Arabic. And one of her clients is here tonight, and so I would like to invite Christina and Ahmed to come up and share that story.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christina Al-Haddad. I'm a former No, I don't want to say former. I'm an IJC fellow. And I was placed for life, always. And I was placed at the Arab American Association in South Brooklyn for 2015 and 2016. And this is my client, Ahmed Shaban, who is from Egypt. He will take 5 minutes to tell you the story, but I just want to briefly say that when I first met Ahmed, I was just lost. I didn't know what I was doing. It was the beginning of my fellowship. He came in and he's like, I need you to help me. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do with you, but okay, I'll try. And it was a beautiful full circle that fortunately ended on a beautiful note. Ahmed came to me and he said, I need you to save me, I need you to save my family. And literally on the last day of my fellowship, I got to meet his whole family who came from Egypt. So I would like to introduce Ahmed Shaban, who will tell you about his story.
Hello, good evening, everybody. So yeah, my story actually started, I'm not gonna go so far, just like, let's cut it short, because it's quite a long story. So I was actually looking for somebody to help me originally to apply for asylum because of, in Egypt I was part of the revolution that took place in 2011. And then after the change of the regime, I was not able to stay longer there, and my family also as well. So I came here and then I was looking for a lawyer to actually, take my case. And the thing with this organization that there is no chance. So I went to Human Rights first. I went to many organizations, and there is no chance. You stay in a long line. You have to wait for years. I was here. My whole family was still in Egypt. So then I went to the Arab American Association. I met Christina. And then I wrote my story in a paper. I gave it to her. I had like a Facebook page about the revolution. It's called Eyes of the Revolution. And she asked me about it, and I just told her the whole story. And she looked at me and she said, okay, I'll take your case. And she did. And since then we started working together on the case. She even applied for expediting my case as well, because my family was endangered there in Egypt. And then she called me that day, I can't believe it, and she told me yeah, your case got accepted, to see the officer sooner. So I felt so excited, and then we kept meeting every day for working on this, and she was really helpful for me. I mean, she did everything for me, and I'm really grateful. Christina, I met you. She basically changed my life actually, and the organization was really good with everything. They helped me in everything actually, everything. So then we applied for the case, and then we won the case. I got granted asylum in 2016. And then the organization basically stopped here, the work stopped here, but Christina didn't actually. She kept going on with me for applying as well for my family, because once you get granted, you can bring my wife and my kids over from Egypt, and she did this for me. And we couldn't wait to see them. And she as well, she was like, I want to see them as soon as they come. And when we actually arrived, 1 week later, we met Christina, and this moment was just you can't describe this, because it's, going back 2 years when I sat with her, she told, one of the things she told me is that she's going to be away in 2 years, so somebody else will follow up with you. And then I felt oh, this is going to be bad, because you never know whoever is coming does he have is he driven towards the case? Is he going to be? So I didn't say anything. I said, okay, I'll take my chances, but let's see how we go. And she has to complete, she did complete all the case with me, and she was also able to meet my kids and my wife, and that was really great. So thank you so much, Christina.
By the way, it's time for you to apply for the green card, so we got to do that as soon as possible.
Never let up as a lawyer. That's right. You've been a very attentive audience, and I'm sure you've been sitting on all these questions. So for all of our panelists, if you have a specific question, or for me or for JoJo, please raise your hand. We'll bring the microphone over. In the back.
I was wondering if you could tell us why you decided to do work on Long Island and a little bit about the work on Long Island.
So that's a very good question because there are lots of resources, as Lindsay has said, in New York City. When there was this influx of unaccompanied minor children and also adults with children from Central America back in 2014, there were a lot of resources here in New York. However, what was happening was that a lot of the funding that we were getting was restricted to working with New York residents. And so it was heartbreaking to see children come into court and you interview them and you are able to take the case of the person who lives in New York City, and for the person who lives in Long Island, give them a piece of paper and say, this is a referral to go to someone else in Long Island, when you know very well that that is not going to work. And so we made an effort after IJC was created in 2014 to expand to Long Island because we recognized the need there. And so we put some of our justice fellows and community fellows on Long Island to be able to provide that service. There is still a huge need on Long Island. We recognize that, and we are making all the efforts we can to meet that need.
And I will add to Suffolk County, which many of you may know has been the site of some very gruesome murders, gang murders. Suffolk County has a huge population of Salvadoran immigrants, and they didn't just come, but the reason why so many people and children have been coming is because these families settled in the late 80s after and during the Civil War in El Salvador, and also so much unrest in Central America. So this has been a hotbed, and many people say, well, why there? There's a lot of agriculture in Suffolk County too, and it was a place where immigrants settled. So in New York, everybody comes from everywhere, but Suffolk County and to a large degree Nassau as well. And so when the unaccompanied minors came, consider just in one school district in Brentwood, Long Island, 4,000 children in the last 3 years out of a school district of 20,000 came just from Central America alone. So when Jojo's talking about services, this is a lot, free pro bono services, and many of the children had to rely on private lawyers in Suffolk County. There are a few amazing organizations like Catholic Charities and Corescent, but nobody could really afford it. So there is still a very great need on Long Island, but there's a very great need everywhere.
Could you tell us how this Immigrant Justice Corps is funded?
I was hoping no one would ask the question, but you asked it. So we originally were incubated by the Robin Hood Foundation. Since 2014, we've basically been funded through foundations and private individuals. We recognize that we can't rely on foundations and individuals forever, and so we've tried to diversify the funding as much as possible, but it's just based on individuals who like what we do and basically recognize that the federal government is not going to put lawyers on the ground for immigrants. States are also highly leveraged today in terms of debt and can only do so much. I think a lot depends on all of us to figure out how we help immigrants and how we ensure that American ideals of justice, liberty, and dignity and compassion are upheld. So the short answer is that we rely on funding from individuals and foundations. You're very welcome.
Yes, hi. I have a question. I heard in the news that it's starting in October 18th. The Department of Homeland Security is going to start surveilling and basically checking social media and internet from immigrants. In my case, I'm a green card holder, formerly undocumented for many years. I'm a student here at Hunter. And even natural citizens. So to what extent should we be aware of our capacities? In my case, I like to advocate for DACA, for undocumented immigrants, myself being a former one. Could you inform us a little more about those initiatives? Or
I'm a naturalized citizen myself, so I share that same concern. I haven't personally really heard of any initiatives, but it's something that I am following closely. Hoping maybe the ACLU or NYCLU gets involved in this, because I find it very intrusive. My parents are also green card holders. We have a lot of family members who are green card holders or naturalized citizens, and it's just very, very egregious that this administration is going that far to monitor us. That's not what a democracy should do.
I mean, I kind of shared Victor's take, is that it's unfortunately a little bit too early to tell in certain circumstances. Until you start hearing accounts of really what happens on the ground, it's hard to know. I mean, I think of particular concern is probably people who are entering at points of entry when you have a lower expectation of privacy in your electronic communications, et cetera. So I think that's a big question, is when people are arriving at points of entry, from trips abroad or things like that. That I think might be a particular area of concern.
You mean immigration asking them what's on Facebook? What do you mean by that?
Like looking through people's phones.
Right, which they did during the first travel ban, too.
Yeah.
So do you advise people, be careful on what you post? I mean, that's probably a good advice for all of us.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of teenage clients whose Facebooks are totally open and public, so I especially with them, and but yeah, I think I would be especially concerned at points of entry, specifically if people travel and then are coming back, areas where you have a lower expectation of privacy, to put your phone on airplane mode.
Right. We have time for one more question, and I wish I could point without looking. I feel so badly, but yes.
Thank you all so much for sharing your experiences and stories with us. I'm interested from an advocacy perspective about DACA, because so much of the advocacy strategies with the new administration have had to be retooled to speak to the elements that they care about. Has there been any thoughts about advocating for DACA from an economic and financially beneficial perspective? And just conversely, if so, is there any risk of potential future exploitation of DACA recipients if they've been looked at just from a financial standpoint?
I am tired. I'm tired of the narrative that it's around, that has emerged after the announcement, right? Because what has been happening, okay, so I started organizing in 2011, actually 2012. And in 2013, when the New York State DREAM Act was in the House and it was denied, I was mad. And I was mad because there was not a lot of, you did not hear much about DACA and the DREAM Act in the news. And what has happened after the announcement is that a lot of news outlets have taken this opportunity to frame DACA recipients, to frame Dreamers as this economic opportunity for the country, as opposed to people who just need basic human rights. And I think we have to be careful when we start carrying on the narrative, right? The good immigrant versus bad immigrant, because what it does, it demonizes our parents. It criminalizes our family members. I'm in a mixed status family right now, and what I keep hearing is, these kids were brought by their parents. Their parents broke the law, not them. And what that does is it allows for what's happening now for conservatives to introduce the DREAM Act while criminalizing our parents at the same time. And I think the narrative is already there. I think that when he was running for presidency, that's exactly how he used DACA in order to get into the White House, by saying that these kids are providing, they're paying taxes, they're working with a Social Security, and I honestly think it's crap. I think the narrative needs to change. And even when talking about immigration, when we say like this country, you know, give us the poor, and you know we'll be here for, honestly, it's not that the United States has lost its touch for welcoming immigrants. It has lost its touch even more for welcoming immigrants of color. And I think that's important to recognize, because it's not Spaniards and it's not English and it's not Danish and Swedish that are being affected. There are immigrants of color, Arabs, Central Americans, just even when we look at Puerto Ricans, right? What's happening there, it's like, I think we have to move forward, especially now. We have to be careful with the narratives that's carried on. And what we need to do is start cleaning it up, because something that I complimented Obama for, even though he created a deportation machine, was allowing the country to become, even in mainstream media, to become more immigrant friendly. Trump went back, right? And demonized our communities and criminalized them. So in regards to advocacy and activists, we have to be careful with the narrative. And we have to allow undocumented voices to come forward and say exactly what they're thinking, because their parents and their grandparents and their aunties and their uncles are in line. And they're the ones that are being affected the most. So if anything, it would be to create platforms for undocumented voices to rise as opposed to just allies. And to allow the narrative to change according to the needs of the community, so that we know how to cater to them, not just economically, but mentally, for mental health services and domestic violence services and everything else, right, that surrounds immigration, that's just not economics and how we can benefit this country. We are more than money, and we are more than what dollars we can make for the community, for this country. Sorry, that was a small rant.
We're also moved and touched and inspired by all of you. I want to thank Judge Katzman for bringing us this program, and Liz Robbins and Jojo Anabile and the extraordinary young people who have led this discussion. Two thoughts before we invite you to join us upstairs for the reception. One is that the first Stepansky Foundation inspired human rights program we did here at Roosevelt House brought us Manal al-Sharif with a seemingly hopeless cause of empowering Saudi women to drive. We know what has happened last week. So maybe Roosevelt House karma will add to rational thinking in the future. I'm also so glad that President Raab has joined us, so I can reiterate what DACA efforts she made. I described them earlier. Thank you, President Raab. And please join us upstairs to talk further to our panelists, to the President, and to all of us. Thank you.